Seoul's spy agency says there's a possibility that Pyongyang's drones took pictures of the office of President Yoon when they recently crossed the border. The National Intelligence Service also says it's possible for the North to conduct a nuclear test at any time. Starting today, a negative COVID-19 test is a must for all travelers coming in from China. According to the health authorities today, more than 30% of those entering from China have tested positive. Thousands of mourners pray at the funeral mass for the late Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI in Vatican City's vast St. Peter's Square in a ceremony led by Pope Francis, his successor. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea, and thank you for joining us on Arirang News. The South Korean military had insisted that none of the North Korean drones that intruded into the South's airspace last week entered Seoul's no-fly zone, but it has now reversed that stance. After going through a detailed analysis, it said one of the drones had in fact violated the northern end of the area. Bae-eun-ji has more.
More than a week after 5 North Korean drones crossed into the South's airspace last Monday, Seoul's military admitted that one of them had briefly entered the northern end of a no-fly zone. This zone, also known as P-73, has a 3.7-kilometer radius surrounding the presidential office in central Seoul. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff had denied that one of the drones had entered this zone, but reversed its stance on Thursday. The military said that this comes after conducting a detailed analysis on the trajectory of the drone. But it insisted that it did not fly directly over the Yongsan area where the office of President Yoon is located, and stressed that there are no problems regarding the security of the presidential office. An official from the JCS said because the drone flew about 3 kilometers from ground, and considering its capabilities, the North would not have been able to take close-up photos of the presidential office. But South Korea's National Intelligence Agency said the possibility that the North may have taken photos of it nonetheless cannot be ruled out.
We expressed our concerns that pictures of the presidential office in Yongsan may have been taken by North Korea, and the NIS said that is a possibility.
Last week's drone intrusion prompted South Korea's military to scramble fighter planes and attack helicopters, but it wasn't able to bring down the drones, allowing them to fly over the capital area for about an hour. To prevent this from happening again, the military said it conducted a drill on Thursday afternoon involving live fire training, using Ka-1 light attack aircraft and Cobra attack helicopters.
Through this drill, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and operating forces were able to train for classified military operations using aircraft similar to the enemy's drones.
Thursday's exercise comes about a week after the military staged similar drills to counter drones that did not involve live fire training. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
Lawmakers in South Korea were briefed earlier today about the latest intelligence on North Korea. The National Intelligence Service is said to have reiterated in the briefing that the regime has finished preparations for its next nuclear test and also confirmed that the North's former foreign minister Lee Yong-ho was indeed purged. Our National Assembly correspondent Han Sung-woo tells us more.
South Korea's National Intelligence Service has told lawmakers that the roads leading to North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear complex have been completed, meaning the regime's next nuclear test, which would be its 7th overall and first since 2017, could take place at any time. That's according to South Korean lawmaker Yoo Sang-bum of the ruling People Power Party, speaking at a briefing after a session of the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee. As for the regime's missiles, he said officials from the National Intelligence Service reported in the session that it's not yet clear whether Pyongyang's so-called high-thrust solid-fuel motor that it tested last month could actually produce what it claimed to be a thrust of 140 tons.
The NIS believes the engine is of an ICBM grade, but is not yet certain whether it could actually provide such a strong thrust, although it looks possible judging from what the engine looks like on the outside.
Meanwhile, the Democratic Party of Korea's Yoon, told reporters that the intelligence authorities aren't sure whether the North's former foreign minister, Lee Yong-ho, was executed last year, as was reported on Wednesday by the Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun.
The NIS confirmed that Lee Yong-ho was purged, but said it couldn't be verified whether he was executed.
The latest intelligence comes after a year of unprecedented military provocations from the North, prompting observations from experts that inter-Korean relations will likely not improve in the first half of 2023. 한성우, Arirang News.
As education reform is one of President Yoon's 3 major reform goals, these plans include bold steps aiming to provide education that's more fitting to the current society. This took center stage for today's policy briefings. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said on Wednesday that the nation's current public education system, run entirely by the government, doesn't reflect the changes in society as it goes through the fourth industrial revolution.
우리가 자유와 창의를 존중하고 이 교육을 통해서 그 사회의 어떤 성장 잠재력과 경쟁력을 키우려고 하면은 가장 중요한 것이 교육의 다양성입니다. 국가가 교육을 관장을 한다고 해서 이 교육이라고 하는 것을 우리가 하나의 서비스라고 한번 생각을 해봅시다. 국가가 관장을 한다고 해서 이거를 국가의 독점 사업처럼 생각해서는 안 된다는 겁니다.
President Yoon was speaking as the ministries of education and culture briefed him on their goals for 2023. Also attending were around 150 people from public and private sectors, including teachers and content creators. In response to this statement, the Education Ministry announced that it will utilize more digital assets to provide education fitting to each student while making sure parents are supported in the burdens they face raising young children. Education is one of the 3 major areas for reform that President Yoon called for recently, along with pensions and labor. In the briefing by the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism, the ministry said it'll provide aggressive financial support for South Korea's media content. Content startups, including movies, webtoons, and fashion, will receive support stage by stage. More than $622 million will be available in different forms for content creators. On top of this, the government is planning to provide tax cuts for productions that are released on streaming platforms. This, as content on OTT services gets global exposure easily than elsewhere. The president said content is more than just a cultural export.
콘텐츠 산업이라고 하는 것이 콘텐츠 산업에 그치는 것이 아니고 다른 모든 인프라 산업, 뭐 방산, 뭐 다른 모든 산업에 이것이 대한민국의 이미지를 제공함으로써 다 영향을 직간접으로 미치는 것이기 때문에.
The ministry also said that the year 2023 will be announced as Korea Visiting Year to attract more tourists from overseas. Efforts include the ability to register whole groups for the Korea Electronic Travel Authorization or KETA service, as well as making the service available in Chinese and Japanese. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Starting today, all travelers to South Korea from China must submit a negative COVID-19 test. One Chinese national, in the meantime, was apprehended in Seoul after escaping from being quarantined after testing positive. Jo Sung-min has the latest.
South Korea on Thursday logged 64,106 new COVID-19 cases as it began requiring all people arriving from China to submit a negative test before they board their Korea-bound flight. It's the second straight day for the daily figure to come in below 65,000. 194 of them originated from overseas, while there were 66 more deaths. As for the details of the new rules, all those boarding flights from China must submit a PCR test taken within the last 48 hours. Or they can submit a rapid antigen test by a medical expert in the prior 24 hours. The exceptions are those coming to attend a funeral, diplomats on duty, infants and children younger than 6, and those who have recovered from COVID within the past 40 days. Having been on alert for a resurgence of the virus in winter, South Korea said the measures are designed to prevent an influx of new variants from mainland China and neighboring territories. Travelers from Hong Kong and Macau will also have to hand in a negative PCR test result before entry starting Saturday. Meanwhile, a Chinese national who escaped a quarantine facility in South Korea 2 days ago after having tested positive on arrival was found and apprehended in Seoul on Thursday. Police said they found the 41-year-old man in a hotel at around 1 p.m. The man reportedly went missing on Tuesday after refusing to enter a government-designated hotel in Incheon that provides temporary quarantine accommodation for foreigners. The World Health Organization said Wednesday that China is failing to provide accurate data on the damages it sustained from the pandemic and said it is underrepresenting the figures with those it has disclosed. The WHO chief expressed his concerns about the surge in COVID-19 infections in China and called on Beijing to deliver prompt and regular data on hospitalization and deaths. 조성민, 아리랑 뉴스.
The funeral mass for the former Pope Benedict XVI began on Thursday morning local time. Tens of thousands of people from around the world gathered at the Vatican to send their farewells. Choi Min-jung reports.
Pope Benedict XVI was laid to rest on Thursday morning as around 100,000 people gathered at St. Peter's Square to pay tribute. The funeral mass in Vatican City was held after a 3-day wake, visited by some 200,000 mourners from around the world.
I'm very happy to be here. He was a great pope, and he left the church his legacy of being friends with Jesus.
Pope Francis led the ceremony, marking the first time in the modern era that a current pope has presided over the funeral of a predecessor.
Holding fast to the Lord's last words and to the witness of his entire life, we too, as an ecclesial community, want to follow in his steps and to commend our brother into the hands of the Father.
Attending were German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and Italian President Sergio Mattarella. Also, the King of Belgium and former Queen of Spain, as well as the leaders of Poland and Hungary. Pope Benedict's body was buried in the former tomb of John Paul II, who was the head of the Catholic Church before him. Officials have said the funeral was kept simple in accordance with the late former pontiff's wishes. Pope Benedict died on New Year's Eve at the age of 95, roughly a decade after stepping down due to health reasons. He was the first pope in 6 centuries to do so. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Turning to the war in Ukraine, following loss of around 100 Russian lives on New Year's Day, Moscow blames its own soldiers for using their phones, which it said allowed Ukraine to track their locations. This idea, however, has been dismissed by many. Shin Yoon tells us more.
Moscow has blamed its own troops for a strike on New Year's Day in which dozens of them were killed. Russia's defense ministry on Wednesday said Ukraine's missile attack killed at least 89 Russian soldiers because they were using their mobile phones despite it being banned.
But it is already obvious that the main reason for what happened was the switching on and mass use by personnel, contrary to the existing ban on mobile phones, in a strike zone accessible to enemy weapons.
The ministry claimed that this allowed Ukraine to track and determine the coordinates of the soldiers' locations. Ukraine targeted a housing facility for Russian conscripts in Makiivka in the Donetsk region right after midnight on Sunday. Ukrainian officials claimed the number of casualties was higher, at around 400 killed and another 300 wounded. Whether it's 89 or 400, it's the highest number of deaths Russia has suffered in a single day since the onset of the war. Ukraine's military called Russia's claim that the attack was enabled by the use of mobile phones ridiculous. It claimed instead that it exploited Russia's inability to secretly deploy its troops. Russia's reasoning was also dismissed by pro-Moscow bloggers. They claimed that Russian troops lacked protection and were reportedly located close to stockpiles of ammunition, which apparently exploded. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said now is the time to strengthen Ukraine's defenses.
We have no doubt that the current masters of Russia will throw everything they have left at us and everyone they can round up to try and turn the war around and at least delay their defeat.
Zelensky said Russia is also planning a series of attacks using Iranian drones. Yoon, Arirang News.
Grim prospects of a recession on the horizon are doing little to weaken the U.S. Federal Reserve's intentions to secure price stability via hawkish monetary policies. Our Lee explains.
The U.S. Federal Reserve wants substantially more evidence of easing inflation. According to the minutes from their most recent meeting on Wednesday local time, the Fed backed fresh rate hikes this year. It said that a restrictive policy stance would need to be maintained until incoming data provided confidence that inflation was on a sustained downward path to 2%, the central bank's inflation target. This, the Fed says, is likely to take some time. The minutes also reveal that a slower pace of rate rises is not an indication of any weakening of the committee's resolve to achieve its price stability goal. Officials also warned that anything other than a necessary relaxing of financial measures would make it more difficult for the committee to restore price stability. Policymakers' interest rate projections published after the meeting showed that most officials now see the interest rate peaking between 5% and 5.25% in 2023. This means at least 0.75 percentage points worth of rate rises to come. It also showed that rate cuts are not expected until 2024. One expert says that with rates so high now, the Fed is growing more cautious going forward.
The Fed, what they're trying to do right now is, balance risks of making sure that inflation gets down much closer to 2% and stays near 2%, while also trying not to over-tighten. And so by slowing down after executing this rapid tightening over 2022, they're going to be able to thread the needle more easily and take in the data as they make these decisions.
Meanwhile, after the Fed's policy meeting, U.S. stocks rose after back-and-forth trading. The S&P 500 gained 0.8% in a volatile session, while the Dow Jones added 0.4%. The technology-heavy Nasdaq Composite advanced 0.7%. Oil prices fell by more than $4 per barrel, posting the steepest percentage loss in the first 2 trading days of any year for over 3 decades. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Last year, South Korean shipbuilders accounted for the largest share of high-value and eco-friendly ships worldwide. Data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday shows that the country clinched high-value ship orders totaling nearly 12 million compensated gross tons. This is equal to 58% of the global total. High-value ships include LNG carriers, container ships, and crude oil carriers. South Korea accounted for 70% of the orders worldwide for large LNG carriers and 50% of the eco-friendly ship orders. After hosting the Winter Olympics, South Korea's Pyeongchang County has become one of the most well-known spots for winter activities, and the city is currently hosting one of the country's biggest festivals of the season. Our Song Yoo-jin went there and files this report.
A great way to start off the new year, having some winter fun. One place you can do that is Pyeongchang County in Gangwon-do Province. Located 700 meters above sea level, it's one of the coldest and snowy places in South Korea. The area is also famous for trout.
Pyeongchang houses the country's first and largest trout farm. Trout raised in the clean and clear waters here are known for being soft and chewy.
In light of this, the county has been holding the Pyeongchang Trout Festival every year. It's one of the country's biggest winter festivals, offering visitors a chance to try both traditional and modern winter activities. And now it's back for the first time in 3 years, having been canceled due to COVID-19. From early morning, people streamed in to do some traditional ice fishing. People living in this area need to break through thick sheets of ice to catch fish when the river freezes. And this was an opportunity for avid anglers of all ages from Korea and abroad to try their hand at an age-old technique.
Definitely interesting. Fishing in the winter on a frozen river is quite interesting.
Learning ice fishing is easy, but to succeed is another thing. But even if you fail, you can still learn valuable life lessons such as patience and perseverance.
We just waited and waited for something good to happen on the end of our line. Then, someone fishing next to us gave us a fish.
But it's too early to be disappointed. There's still a chance at barehand fishing, the highlight of the festival. The frigid weather did not stop passionate participants, including me, from plunging into this ice-cold water.
After a really long wait of more than hours, I finally have this trout in my hand. I originally thought that I would go back home empty-handed, but I somehow managed to catch this trout, so it's really rewarding and happy. And to be honest, while catching the trout, it was freezing because it's currently below 0 degrees Celsius here in Pyeongchang. But now that I think of it, it's really rewarding.
And what's better than feasting on your catch right away? You can enjoy your trout either raw or grilled at a nearby cafeteria. There are other winter games to try besides the fishing, like traditional Korean ice sledding, snow tubing, ice skating, snow rafting, and more. For those who wish to try out this winter wonderland and also some great trout, the festival runs until January 29th. 송유진, Arirang News, Pyeongchang.
University students in South Korea are taking part in volunteer work in rural areas where they can donate their talent and make use of skills they've learned at school. Jung Eun-ju has the full story.
The usually quiet countryside village during the farming off-season is buzzing with life. At the village entrance, nursing students give the elderly a health checkup.
Since the elderly here do not have a hospital nearby, we are visiting them to do volunteer work, measure blood pressure, check for diabetes, and educate them on health.
Students also give the elderly a makeover. After that, students from the Department of Photography, Image, and Drone take portrait photographs for them. Students also replace old lights and houses with LEDs to save power and make homemade jjajangmyeon to eat with all 120 villagers.
It would be so nice if the students could visit at least once a year to share their talents and do various volunteer work for the elderly.
About 60 volunteers, including students and professors from Gwangju University, have taken part in volunteer activities. Students are also satisfied because they can put into practice what they've learned in class.
When students go to rural areas to volunteer, they're encouraged to do activities for the elderly that practice the spirit of sharing, in place of agricultural volunteer work that's difficult to do right now anyways.
The Jeollanam-do Province regional headquarters of the National Agricultural Cooperative Federation has collaborated with local universities to expand rural volunteering.
Universities and Nongyup have done separate volunteer work until now, but in the future we hope to work together so that more elderly people in rural areas can benefit from it.
The university students' talent donation is becoming a source of happiness for the elderly in rural areas. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
On Korea's traditional calendar, tomorrow is Sohan, which means minor cold. Just like the name signifies, no extreme cold is in the forecast tomorrow. Rather, temperatures will surpass the seasonal average for most regions. The capital region will be mild at 5 degrees for the daytime. Places like Pohang will be warmer, with maximum temperatures reaching 10 degrees. And snow's in the forecast for most regions starting tomorrow daytime. Parts of the Seoul metropolitan area and Jeollabuk-do province will see up to 8 centimeters. For mountainous regions and inland areas of Gangwon-do province, heavy snowfall up to 10 centimeters is in store. This round of snowfall is forecast to last until Saturday morning. Partly cloudy to overcast skies are expected for the morning hours. I'll be starting off at -3 degrees. Highs in Seoul get up to 5 degrees, Daejeon 8, Gyeongju will be reaching 11 degrees. Even after the snow, mild conditions will continue to prevail across the capital region. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That brings us to the end of the newscast on this Thursday night. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news happening in South Korea and around the globe. Join us then.